clay friends. This demo is to show you how to start the body for a standing animal, and it can be a pig or a sheep or a bear or a hippo, anything with short legs really. The handout with this class gives you the instructions for a sheep, and the beginning of that project is the same for all these animals. They're all going to be fairly similar until we get to the finish. And so we had a request for hippo, so I'm going to demo getting a hippo started today. The same way that I start with reference material for the masks and heads, I want to start with some reference material for the whole body also. So I start off by looking for different angles of the animal that I want to sculpt, and then I sketch out some dimensions so I have an idea of where I want to start. And this gives me an idea of how big to make the pinch pots that I'm going to join together. This area is going to be a pinch pot here, joined to another pinch pot here, 4 legs, and then a pinch pot for the head. The process is we're going to get the 2 pinch pots attached and attach the legs with it upside down and let it firm up a little bit, and then we'll add the head later in another video. So I've sketched this out so I know that I want the body to be 7 inches long and about 4.5 inches in diameter, and my legs are going to be about 2 inches long and about 1 inch wide. So we'll talk about some different ways to do that. This is a little bit of a repeat, so I'm going to go a little bit faster than I normally would, because the basic introduction to sculpting video shows you how to make a couple pinch pots and join those together for the body. For this particular project, so I know that I'm going to join 2 together and need 7 inches total in length. So that means I'm going to need 2 pinch pots that are 3.5 inches long, and I want them both to be about 4.5 inches wide so that I can join them together. So I make my standard pinch pot by pinching and turning and pinching and turning and pinching and turning. As I go, I'm going to continuously hold this up to my ruler and make sure that I'm stretching it out to 3.5 inches long, and then also periodically hold it up to the ruler and aim for that 4.5 inches wide. And you can manipulate the edges if you need to get wider. It's easy to spread this wider or bring it back in. And you can see I'm trying to keep the clay 1/2 inch thick to 3/8 of an inch thick, just like we have been for our other projects. So I'm going to make 2 of these, and we're going to use our serrated rib, dip it in water, and we're going to score the edges to form some joining glue here. I'm going to agitate the water and the clay together, just enough to form a slurry on the surface here. I'm going to do that on both sides. Get my ruler out of the way for a moment. And then we're gonna join them together, and we're gonna blend it with our serrated rib, and then we're gonna run a coil around the edge to make sure it's really sealed. And before we fire these, we're going to puncture a hole in them so that it can dry evenly and fire evenly in the kiln. Okay, so I'm going to work these together, and I'm going to use that serrated rib again to blend some clay from each of the pinch pots onto the other pinch pot. So there's going to be a lot of back and forth. Then I'm also going to add a coil all the way around too. So I'm just I'm digging in enough to drag clay from one part onto the other part. Kind of drag all different directions, and every once in a while I will dip it just in a little bit of water. Don't want to add too much water because that can weaken it. And then once this is sealed, it's strong, we can paddle it and change it into all different shapes. So I'm not super worried about the overall shape yet. I just want to make sure the volume is right so that I've got enough of a body to support the kind of animal that I want. So you'll take your own animal and you can search the internet and print up lots of different angles, and then you can kind of map out the proportions, decide how big you want to make it. I'm trying to keep mine at no more than 12 inches in any one direction. So I think once I get the head added on this, he's going to be about 12 inches long. They have surprisingly long heads. So you can work with your animal and get the proportions kind of mapped out that you want and decide how big your body needs to be. And the other thing about this one, when we're working with legs that are this short, and this one happened to be, when I worked out the proportions, the legs on this one are exactly 1 inch thick. And that's kind of our marker. We don't want clay any thicker than 1 inch for sculpting because it just takes too long to dry and can blow up in the kiln. So since they're right at 1 inch, we really have the option on this one. Anytime your legs are 1 inch or less, you can use a hollow tube leg or you can use a solid leg. So I'll show you both once we get this blended. So I'm just looking at this from all different angles and trying to get a start on the blending here. You can see it's still got a few little cracks, so I'm still working those cracks a little bit. Then I'm also going to take some clay and I'm going to pinch the clay out with, just use my whole hand, start to pinch this out into a basic coil shape and then roll it a bit. This is way thicker than I want. Don't need a huge coil. I don't need that much clay either. So this coil is going to run all the way around just for some extra reinforcement. So it's going to make sure that we're really sealed well. All right, not a pretty coil, but doesn't have to be pretty. Just needs to make it all the way around. So I'm going to stand this up and wrap this right around the center point. So this coil is going right on top of that seam that I just joined. So we're going to go in now and we're going to go back with that serrated rib and dip it in water just a little bit, and we're going to drag half that coil up and half that coil down. So this is extra reinforcement so that the clay doesn't remember that it was 2 different pots and crack apart in the drying or firing process. So we want that sealed really well. And notice I'm working back and forth all different directions to really blend that in. We don't want to see that there was a coil there either. We want to blend it until it looks like just one big giant sort of egg shape. We don't want to see the seam, but we also don't want to see a coil on there. So you can use that, the serrated rib is great for just dragging clay from the high points and depositing it down in the low points and help us get just a nice overall shape here. Now this is going to be interesting because we've been working a lot with hairy animals and fur texture. And so it's going to be interesting to see how we make some kind of wrinkly hippo skin here. Probably a little bit similar to like an elephant sort of skin, but we'll play with some different textures until we get something that we like, that think we looks appropriate for a hippo. So again, get it close. I'm just making sure that when I put my rib onto that coil, I put it halfway and I make sure I drag half that clay up and half that clay down. And then I go all different directions to kind of smooth it off and blend it. So it's grabbing and dragging half the clay down and grabbing and dragging half that clay up. And then back and forth all different directions. And again, this is a really strong form once we get it sealed. It's got that air bubble in there. And so once we get it, we're sure that it's all sealed, we can paddle this into all different kinds of shapes. So we can really change the shape a lot later. But for the moment, I'm going to set this down and talk about legs. So at home, if you have you want something soft to set it on, so you can take, this is just an old towel, you can take and roll up both ends. If you roll it from both ends, you can kind of create a little bit of a cradle there, so that'll hold it. Or sometimes I have, this is just like some packing material that something was delivered in. If you have any old packing material laying around, just something soft that's not going to flatten one side. So we'll set this aside for just a second here and talk about the legs. Because this particular critter came out with legs that are exactly 1 inch thick, I've got 2 options. I can roll out a giant coil that's 1 inch thick, And then I know that these are 2 inches long, but they're going to join up into the body, and so I'm going to cut them at an angle. So I want to cut off 3-inch pieces, and then I'll cut at an angle, and it'll leave 2 inches down here and then 1 inch to bring up and join into the body. So the first option is, because they happen to be exactly 1 inch, we're okay up to 1 inch. I can roll out a 1-inch coil. So again, I start just by squeezing the clay, getting these dry chunks out of the way, and then roll this out and get my ruler back here. Get it to 1 inch thick, and then I want to cut off some 3-inch pieces. And that's pretty straightforward there. The legs themselves are going to be the bottom 2 inches, and then we're going to cut at an angle where it's going to join to the body. And you can use your needle tool or an old butter knife or your wooden knife tool. So I'll hold these up. So this is 1 inch across, about 2 inches here, and then the top inch I cut at an angle, so you can see how that's going to join onto the body. And we'll do the same thing with these two. So we've got 4 legs all cut at an angle, and I'll show you the other option. The other option is to use the hollow method that we showed in that first sculpting video also. And that, we need our skewer. Where'd the handy dandy skewer go? All right, here's our skewer. So for that, what we're gonna do is roll out a piece, only we're gonna roll it down about down to about ½ inch thickness instead of 1 inch, because we're gonna put the skewer in and roll it some more to widen it. So we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna cut 4 3-inch pieces, and then we're gonna use that skewer to plug on the inside and make it into a hollow tube. So if my legs were 1½ inches thick, I would have to use this method. Because they're exactly 1 inch thick, I've got the option. So we're going to take this, and same thing, we're going to cut this into 3-inch pieces. So these are 3 inches long. So I've got about ½ inch thick, 3 inches long. And then with each of these 3-inch pieces, we're going to take the skewer and work the skewer inside very slowly, and then it'll open this up into a hollow tube. And if you remember from the first video, we take the skewer and work it in halfway, and then we flip it over and come in from the other end. And that just helps reduce the chance of it going crooked and coming out the side of your leg instead of going all the way through. Okay, so we have our 3-inch piece of clay, and we've skewered it. Now you can kind of roll it and just press down, and it's going to open that up into a hollow tube. So you can see we've got a hollow tube now. So I would do the same thing with all 3 pieces. You can see it doesn't make it any longer, so you want to cut it the length that you wanted. It just widens it up and makes it hollow. For this particular one, because it's 1 inch, I'm going to just use my solid pieces. So I want to show you how to attach these. And then it's really important just to let this firm up because this clay is so wet, and especially the legs. The legs will just collapse if we don't let it firm up. So you want to hold this and look at it from all different angles, and you can paddle it. And so you're going to decide where the top is and where the bottom is. And we're going to put it belly up. So this is going to be my belly. And you want to take a good look at the images that you've got and any sketches that you've made, and line the legs up where you want them. And we're going to slip and score really well, and then let that firm up. So I'm going to score the clay where I've cut it at an angle, and I'm going to score it right up the side here. And we're going to blend that. And I'm not worried about the shape or position. We can change this around later. So right now I'm just worried about getting them on there equal. We're going to do the same thing with our serrated rib. We're going to drag and blend that clay under the body. So we want to drag lots of clay from the leg up onto the body. And then this inside, we're gonna want our wooden knife tool. So we're gonna go into this crack here with a wooden knife tool, and we wanna blend. Again, I'm dragging clay from the leg onto the body. And then I'm gonna add an extra coil. And you'll notice, if you look, most animals are thicker up here where they attach to the body anyway, so that's a really convenient place to add the coil. We need that visually as well as structurally. So I'm just gonna roll a coil and run the coil all the way around. And we're gonna do some more blending. I'm gonna start with a serrated rib on the front side. And then we're gonna let this firm up, and we'll add where we need more muscles and volume. We'll add to that later, but right now we just want to get the core body, the basic shape, formed and firming up. We're gonna set it aside and let it firm up. So you can leave it loosely covered overnight, or you can set it aside, let it air dry for a couple hours. You can set it in front of a fan for like 10 or 15 minutes, or take the blow dryer to it for just 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, so that's leg number 1. And I would do the exact same thing on all of these legs, but rather than have you waste your time just watching the same thing over and over, I'm gonna fast forward here and show you. I take, once I get all of these on, the only other thing that I do before I let them firm up, so we'll pretend all 4 legs are on, I get some sort of other board or cardboard or anything, and I tap it and look at it to make sure. You wanna make sure that the legs are roughly level. And so you can take like a paperback book or piece of cardboard, anything, and just lay on top there and make sure that they're all roughly even and in the position that you want. And once they're in the position that you want, you're just gonna set this aside and let it firm up. And that's our foundation. I could really go any direction still with this. I could still turn this into a sheep or a pig or a hippo, lots of different critters. So there's lots of versatility there. So that's our goal for our first step, is to get 2 pinch pots, seal it up with a coil, and get 4 legs on there. Good luck with that and have fun. Thanks.